let's talk about the eject.
Okay. Okay, so I just created a React app yarn start but yeah, we should see an app. Yeah, there we go. So we have this source folder, has app.js, index.js, and a few other things. There's also a public folder, you can put assets in here, basically.
Okay.
Other than that, pretty clean. There's very little stuff here, and I like that. But now if I do yarn eject, yeah, they have to. Are you really sure you want to do this? This action is permanent. Okay, yes, I want to do it. Okay, done.
All right.
Okay, so the two folders have been created: the config folder and the scripts folder.
Okay.
The scripts folder has these Node.js scripts that replace the start, test, and build commands.
Okay.
Because normally you do npm start, npm run build, and npm test.
Right.
In turn, those will run React scripts start, React scripts build, and React scripts test.
Okay.
And now instead of going through React scripts, they're like, I gave you the scripts. You run these. You can change. You can change them if you want. It's all on you now. But it still uses some of the modules React scripts depends on. And all the configuration files are here. In particular, this is the Webpack configuration. It's 758 lines of configuration. There's also Webpack dev server configuration, which is just configuring it when you run the local dev server. After this happens, so you can still do things normally, but it's been rewired to call that script that it gave you instead of going through their framework.
Okay.
But it still should work the same. But now you're not dependent on the framework anymore. And if you want to do customization of the Webpack config, you go in here and change things.
If you just want to make a web app, you probably can just stick with the default. So in what case you need to change this? I guess that's my first question. Like who will go this route?
Yes, and in my case, I want like a common repository for code that lives outside of this project. Because I want some code that can be shared amongst 3 different projects. And it turns out that their default setup just disallows the inclusion of any file that's outside of the project directory. Like they actually have a module in their Webpack that explicitly disallows it. It's called the module scope plugin. So the first thing you would do is I'm gonna get rid of that. So just so that it would take modules that are outside of the project directory. So that's one example. But then I also wanted to put in Typescript aliases. I forgot, like when I was creating the app, I should have set TypeScript, and I didn't do that. But if I had, then what it would actually do, it actually overwrites the TypeScript file every time it starts the dev server.
Okay.
So you actually can't make changes to the TypeScript config file.
Interesting. I feel like Angular gives you more leeways to.
I think that's true, and that's like as a designer of a library or a framework, that's a philosophy that you can choose. Going back to our open-close principle, we can either choose to add more extension points so that there are more ways to customize your framework. But the more extension points we add, the more complexity we add as well. As a designer of the framework, you could choose to be very conservative about adding extension points or very liberal about adding extension points.
Well, I guess the thing about the extension point is if you want your thing to not be buggy, then you probably will like to put in like error handling or constriction so that however you configure your extension point, you don't actually break the stuff. Because for a person that don't totally understand how this Webpack config works, they might put in a setting that just doesn't work for whatever reason. So then it will require either this person to know the bottom layer of the thing, or you have to give them a good error message so that they know, hey, this doesn't work because of this, so that I can do this. But the more extension point you have, the harder it is to do that.
Yeah, the React scripts team don't really want this maintenance overhead associated with having to maintain these extension points. Therefore, they close it off, but they give you an escape hatch, which is the eject button. They give you the escape hatch to say, hey, if you want to customize, we're not responsible. Basically, they don't want to have to support those use cases.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah. So they just give you the control and then you are responsible. It's just like customizing a car. Once you customize, you don't know whether it will work out or not, but the car company will not support.
Oh, exactly. It's like you just voided the warranty by unscrewing the cover of your device. So that's the analogy they're going for. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. The main thing about this that gives me like a bad taste in my mouth is it's a mechanism for closing the code. It's open source, but they're using this mechanism to close off the code. Like, even though it's open source, they don't want you to touch it. And yeah, they still gave you a way out of it, but the sort of you can't go back is sort of like the mafia. Like once you're out, you're not under my protection anymore. And then, God forbid, something happens to you. I'm not responsible for it. Like there's this thinly veiled threat that counters the notion of open source in a way for me. Because open source is meant to be like, hey, everything is open. And this is a mechanism for closing it.